406.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 411 from 406. My name is Chewie, and I am joined once again by my brother from another mother, Mr. Pip. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. It's Thursday night, also known as podcasting night, also known as the night before my favorite hangover. But hey, enough about my addictions. What's going on with you, my friend?
Not much. It was pretty fucking cool. I got to see you last week. You were in town, which
It was
is amazing.
It was kind of like a fun little pop-in. I had to come to Cleveland for work, and I wanted to spend some time with my team that is out there, which I haven't done a good enough job of doing since I started working with them a couple of years back. The supervisor who works in Cleveland became my supervisor in March of 2020. So for obvious reasons, that got kind of put on pause, and I just didn't have a chance to get there. And I finally made the trip. And, I had the dubious pleasure of spending not one, but 2 nights with you. I came over for Monday Night Football just to watch, Nick Chubb bend his leg 90 degrees in the wrong direction, and got to see
that was bad. Oh, yeah, God, that was bad.
That was tough. I mean, it looked like a bad game from the very first play, and it unfortunately didn't get any better for your Brownies. But I got to see your family, your lovely wife and your children, which was great. And then night number 2 was even better. We got to hang out at an old stomping ground called the Winking Lizard, and we got to share some food and some drinks and some great stories. And it was obviously the highlight of my trip. It was fantastic, and I don't want that to take the place of us getting together and hanging out properly, but man, it does help to fill the gaps.
No, it was cool. I was pumped. Monday night, we just we started a fire. We sat outside and we watched the game. It was a nice night. And I remember I got up and I missed I missed the kickoff and the first 2 plays. I don't know if I was on the phone or in the bathroom, and I come back and you're like, "Oh yeah, it's 7-0." I'm like, "Wait, what?"
yeah. I think it was the first play of the game was a
pick six.
A pick six, yeah. Or taint, as we call it in some circles. Right. Touchdown after interception. It was not pretty for the Browns, unfortunately, and it doesn't look like it's going to get prettier for the season. But who knows? I don't know. Maybe they can bounce back.
They beat up on Tennessee last weekend. I mean, Tennessee is really bad. I think they beat them 27-3. I mean, there was a bunch of ass whoopings in the NFL last weekend. I don't know if you caught many of those, but Miami put 70 on the Broncos. Yeah. And I know you're a Broncos fan.
I'm painfully aware of that one. I didn't watch it, but I saw the final score and the millions of memes that followed. And yeah, it was ugly. I've not seen a professional score like that in a long time. And against my Broncos, definitely was not thrilled about that.
Now, I actually don't know. Are the Broncos really bad this year, or was that just an aberration of a football game? Or both?
I mean, I really honestly don't know yet, but I'm leaning towards really bad, which is bizarre because I know Russell Wilson has had his struggles there, but I don't think he's a bad quarterback. And they have Sean Payton now, who's a Super Bowl winning coach. Yeah. So I have no idea what's happening out there, if it's just being mismanaged or if it's a talent issue. I'll be honest, I don't follow the NFL quite as closely as I used to. I just kind of fair weather root for the teams that I like, which are Denver and Dallas and the Colts. And, hopefully they win. But if they don't, I don't let it ruin my day. It's a fun thing to do on a Sunday when I don't want to do anything else. But I can't tell you the ins and outs of what's going on with that team, except they appear to be pretty terrible.
Yeah. So you don't follow the NFL much. I know you follow college football.
Oh, shit. Here we go.
And I was trading, and I think luckily for you, you didn't watch the game, but I was trading texts with you about the Notre Dame Ohio State game, which was great
Yes.
from a Notre Dame perspective until the last play of the game.
The last fucking play of the game. I can't tell you how close I would have been to having some kind of an embolism if I'd have been watching that game, because I've seen that play out many times before, whether it was USC back with Reggie Bush and the whole Bush push thing, or I mean, you name it. Like, I've seen them lose last second a lot of times, and there's no team I hate losing to more than Ohio State. So that was rough. I traded some well-flavored text messages with your oldest son.
I know.
Probably taught him a few words that I wasn't very proud of, but no, actually that's probably not true, but I hate Ohio State, and I felt very confident going into that game that they would win. I thought if any chance, any time, in South Bend is a tough place to win for sure. And I mean, credit to Ohio State. They were the better team that day, but I still hate them massively.
Yeah. What do you, and even living in Ohio, I mean, I do not consider myself an Ohio State fan. So I was just kind of watching that game as an interested bystander, as a fan, right? I mean, it's two very, very good football programs that I don't particularly have any sort of affinity to either of them. And so I got to actually enjoy it just as a kind of a third party fan. What do you make of the whole Ryan Day versus Lou Holtz thing? Are you familiar with this kind of back and forth?
So I didn't hear what was said. I only read what was said. So I heard the commentary, and I don't know. I mean, as a Notre Dame fan, as someone who grew up a Notre Dame fan and watched the last time they won a national championship game coached by Lou Holtz back in 1988, I love Lou Holtz. I mean, I just think he's great. He's this kind of goofy old man now. And I don't know the context of what he said, if, how critical he was being, but obviously, the Ohio State coach took it personally. And I get that. I understand both sides, I think, in that respect, but I actually kind of liked Lou Holtz's response to is it Ryan Day? Is that his name? I don't know.
Ryan Day. Yeah. He's the coach of Ohio State.
Yeah. So I actually like Lou Holtz's, he basically said, this is how I feel. And if you're going to come after me, then come after me. But this is what I think. And I thought that was at least on. He's like, Ohio State's a great football team. You're great. Or you're a great coach. It was a great game. You had a great win. I think you're a good football team, but I don't think you're great. And I think that's something that a coach would say. I think that's a very coach thing to say, right? Like, it's almost like he's motivating them. I don't think that was his intention, but it doesn't surprise me that it came out that way.
Well, so here's actually what he said. So I went back after the fact, and I was like, because again, all I saw was Ryan Day respond to it, and he was clearly very fired up. And here's what he said, and he said it on the Pat McAfee show, which I love Pat McAfee for a variety of reasons. But he said, I think Notre Dame is a better football team than Ohio State. He said he has lost. He said, then Holtz called out Day for some of his shortcomings as the Ohio State's coach. He lost to Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Michigan twice, and everybody that beats him does so because they're more physical than Ohio State. I think Notre Dame will take the same approach. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, I
those are all objective things that he said.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. He wasn't attacking him personally. He wasn't calling him a bad coach. He was just saying that, he's had some bad losses, and it's because the other teams have been more physical. And I think in a very in a sporting world very dominated by men and insecurities and things like that, I'm sure Ryan Day took it personally and decided to clap back when he got a much deserved win in South Bend. And I think that Holtz's response after that I referenced earlier, I think was a good response to that. I mean, I think he said, hey, I said what I said, and that's what I meant. And I think it's much ado about nothing. Personally, I think it's a clickbait headline just to fire things up and keep the machine moving. But I didn't think it was anything egregious on Lou Holtz's part.
Yeah, I agree. So one more thing on this game. We're not here to talk about football.
Thank you.
Did you see on that last play, there was only 10 guys on the field for Notre Dame?
I have not seen this. I have not seen a single highlight of the game. I refuse to watch it at this point. And I did hear that. And That's disappointing because I really truly think that Marcus Freeman is a fantastic coach. I think he's
I
really
agree.
good.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's his fault or his defensive coordinator's fault, or I don't know what happened. I'm not gonna get into the minutia of it
Yeah.
just because it's not going to change anything, but it's unfortunate and very surprising that that happened.
Yeah. So that same night you were at what? You were at Farm Aid, right?
Yes.
That's how was that show?
Oh my God, dude. It was incredible. It was not I had no idea that I was going to get what I got out of that show, and it was incredible. There were a ton of bands. So Farm Aid is this traveling show, for lack of a better term, that they have one show every year. I guess it's kind of a festival, if you could call it that, because there are a lot of bands on it. And there were quite a few bands that I was very interested in seeing. It hasn't been in Indianapolis in over 20 years, which is kind of crazy because I feel like Indianapolis is the Midwest, certainly known for farming. One of the board members is John Mellencamp. So you'd think that they would have gotten back here, but they've traveled all over the country over the last 20 years. Finally announced the show back here in Indiana, 10 minutes away from my house. And I tried to get tickets when they went on sale and I couldn't. And I was really pissed off about it. So much so that I think I tweeted against Ticketmaster for the first tweet that I've made in like a year or something, just because I'm not really active on Twitter or X or whatever the hell they're calling it these days. But I was very upset about that because the system failed me. I was in the line, I had my tickets in the cart, and I went to click buy now, and it said, sorry, can't process your payment. Like, what the hell does that mean? And then I lost, and the ticket sold out in about an hour, less than an hour.
I remember seeing that tweet. I did not realize until just now that that's what you were trying to purchase. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that's the show, and I was so angry.
So much it flames on the side of my face, breathing heaving breath.
And I was in text message conversations with multiple other people who had the exact same thing happen. So it was very frustrating. And I don't do definitely one of my issues is I have a lot of FOMO when it comes to concerts. And especially because this venue that you and I have been to together before is no more than 10 minutes from my house. So the idea that all of these incredible acts would be 10 minutes from my house and I wouldn't be there, I just couldn't sit with it. So I finally said to my wife, like, we got to go to the show. We got to scalp tickets. Well, I ended up getting tickets for, I don't know how close to face it was, but it ended up being very close to face. The lawn seats were $75 each without the fees. If I would have got them through Ticketmaster, I got them off StubHub with the fees for about $110 each. So, I mean,
bad at all.
with the fees, it would have been at least that much. So ended up kind of all even there. But on this card was a group called many bands. But, the first one that we saw was Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats, Bobby Weir and the Wolf Brothers, Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead, Lucas Nelson and the Promise of the Real. Lucas Nelson is one of Willie Nelson's sons who was there. The Jim Irsay Band featuring Ann Wilson. So for those of you who may not know Jim Irsay, which most of you should, he is the owner of the Indianapolis Colts. And he is very well known for having a very famous and valuable classic rock guitar collection. Like, he collects guitars, and he actually has his own little traveling show where people can pay and come in and see him. And I'll get to that in a second. Margot Price, who I'm not really familiar with, but she's on the board of Farm Aid, along with the four headliners, which are Dave Matthews and Tim Reynolds as one act, John Mellencamp, Neil Young, and Willie Nelson. And those four are always there: Dave, John, Neil, and Willie. And then Margot Price, I don't know how long she's been on the board, but I think she's played 1 or 2 years. But so Nathaniel Rateliff was fantastic. It was a really great show. Bob Weir came out and played 3 songs and left, which is funny. And most of these bands only had 30 to 45 minutes because there were so many on the card that they couldn't play full sets. And the show started at 1 and it ended at about midnight, or actually maybe past midnight.
Wow.
So Lucas Nelson, The Promise of the Real, really great band, fantastic guitar player Lucas Nelson is, and just, it's very country-ish, but it's still good. The Jim Irsay band was the most bizarre experience I think I've ever had. It was, so Jim Irsay comes on stage, and I couldn't honestly see because I was at the very back of the lawn, but he was either in a wheelchair or in a seat. And I think he has been in a wheelchair, in recent days because of his health. But he comes out there and he's like, yep, I'm Jim Irsay. This is my band, and we're going to play some songs for it. And I thought, to be honest, the Jim Irsay band was just his collection of musicians that he sent out on stage. Jim Irsay sang 2 songs on stage. Wow. He sang Lawyers, Guns, and Money, which is an old Warren Zevon song. And then he sang Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd.
Holy shit.
Singing the Roger. Singing the Roger Waters, hello, is there anybody?
Okay.
So he did the gravelly Roger Waters part. And then he had some a couple of females that were on background vocals that did I assume that's David Gilmour who does the higher part. And then in his band was a guy named Kenny Aronoff. If you're not familiar with him, he went to IU. He was a former music professor at IU, but he's a world-renowned session drummer. The guy has played with everybody from Elton John to Bon Jovi to Mellencamp to the Bodines, like the list goes on and on and on. He played for Chickenfoot with Sammy for a while. I mean, it's crazy. He's played with everybody. And Kenny Wayne Shepherd, if you remember that name.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
He came out around the time. He was in while we were in college, like Johnny Lang was coming up, and Kenny Wayne Shepherd has that song called Blue on Black. Kenny Wayne Shepherd comes on stage during this Pink Floyd cover of Comfortably Numb, and he's playing David Gilmour's guitar, guitar. So Jim Irsay, as I mentioned earlier, has this collection of really rare guitars. He probably paid a couple $1 million for this guitar, and he gives it to Kenny Wayne Shepherd to play this song on stage.
Wow.
Which is part really, really cool and part really disgusting, in my opinion, because it just seems like he's just towing this stuff out to be like, look at all my toys. And I can't imagine David Gilmour loves that, but I mean, whatever. He probably loves
the money. Sold it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then Ann Wilson comes on stage. Ann Wilson is the lead singer from Heart.
She's crazy talented.
Amazing talented. She sang 2 songs. She sang a cover of The Who called Love Reign O'er Me. And then she sang Barracuda. And then, of course, it hit me. Jim Irsay gave her as many songs as he gave himself, which was pretty bizarre. And then at the very end, he pulls out this big paper check and says, I'm donating $1 million to Farm Aid, as part of the cause, right? Which is really great. And then it dawns on the entire crowd. Oh, you basically paid $1 million to get a 45-minute set at Farm Aid. They're like, sure, we'll let you join the lineup if you do that. So it was just a really weird experience.
Was he I mean, obviously he's not Roger Waters, but was he good? Or was it embarrassment? Was his, I mean, obviously his band, he's got all these great musicians as part of it, but did he hold his own at least? Or was it just like a joke?
I don't think it was intended to be a joke, but it came off a little farcical. If
Did it really?
I'm being honest, it didn't. His band was amazing. Kenny Wayne Shepherd is an amazing blues guitar player. Kenny Aronoff is a great drummer. He had a lot of really talented musicians on stage. Bought himself the best band, but I maybe it was because I couldn't separate Jim Irsay, the celebrity football owner, with the scattered history, and I just I couldn't displace that enough to really properly judge the performance, but it kind of felt a little weird.
Yeah. Do you know, by chance, have you looked when I'm assuming Farm Aid is not just in Indianapolis? Is that like a tour? Are they touring, or is it literally once a year in Indianapolis?
It is literally once a year, but it changes venue to venue, city to city every year. So in about June, July timeframe every year, they announce where Farm Aid's going to be, and it could be anywhere. And the lineup constantly rotates, with the exception of the 4 mainstays.
Okay, where I was going with that was, the next night was Jim Irsay not around when they were in Cleveland, but it's once a year. So that's why Jim Irsay was there this year. It was in Indianapolis. That makes sense. Okay, yeah, gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay.
Margot Price was fine. She was okay. She did a Tom Petty cover. That was kind of fun. Dave Matthews and Tim Reynolds. This is the second time I've seen Dave in the same venue this year, so that was pretty cool. Dave is always a good show. I've kind of rekindled a little bit of my love for Dave Matthews now that sort of the how do I put this delicately? The crowds at a Dave Matthews show back in college were a little bit obnoxious, and they have become a little bit more, well, a lot of his fans back then are the same age as us, so people have gotten older, they've mellowed a little bit, so it's a better atmosphere. John Mellencamp was after that. He was pretty good. I would say that there were a lot of technical issues with his set. Dave Matthews and Tim Reynolds played an acoustic set, so I think that might have messed with the sound guy. The sound guy definitely struggled towards the end of the show because there were just there were so many bands and there were different sound setups that I think it just became too difficult to get consistent. But
now, I don't know that I've ever gone to a festival show like that. When you've got multiple bands like that on a card, are they like swapping out like drum kits and obviously guitar, like literally everything for each band, or is every band like playing the same instruments?
No, normally they're not all playing the same instruments. They may share some between some sets, depends on who they are, and like the Lucas Nelson in The Promise of the Real, being Willie Nelson's son, came up to play with Willie, so like there was a little bit of sharing when it came to some of that stuff, but for the most part those guys are all playing their own stuff and they all have,
so they're literally like so they're swapping out everything in between each set.
Well, they're swapping out the instruments, but they're not swapping out the sound system. Obviously the same speakers, the same board, probably different people running the sound system, but they have about 20, maybe 25 minutes between acts for someone else to come in and figure out the sound. And, they sound check the drums and some of the other stuff in between the sets, but it's not a lot of time. So I could certainly understand why there would be technical difficulties. So Mellencamp was okay, but the sound was not good. And then Neil Young comes on, and he was really the guy that I was going to see. I have a lot of love and respect for Neil Young. I think he's one of the most amazing songwriters. It's very polarizing. A lot of people don't like his voice, and that's totally fine. That's a personal preference, but I really like him. But he got up there and he played 3 songs and he left, and everybody was just like, well, what was that about? Because he wasn't like Bob Weir. He didn't play like 3 20-minute songs. He played 3 short songs and left, and everyone's just kind of scratching their head like, well, that's kind of silly. I guess they're cutting the set to fit in the time window that they need to be in, but of all people, why cut Neil Young? And so, as at this point of the evening, it had gone dark and the lights were off, and we're all sitting in the crowd. We're waiting for Willie Nelson to come on stage, and somebody starts playing. So there's music playing, and then somebody starts singing, but it's clearly not Willie Nelson. And we're all kind of looking around like, what's going on? And the lights come on, and it's fucking Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan starts playing a song, and we're all losing our minds. Like, this is crazy. Like, Farm Aid is known for having special guests that are unannounced every year. And the lights come on and Bob Dylan's there, and we're like, holy shit. Like, Bob Dylan, a little piece of history for you. Bob Dylan actually kind of unintentionally was the person who conceived Farm Aid, because when he was doing Live Aid back in the 80s, he's like, this is great, but why don't we do this for farmers? Like that would be really helpful for, all these people who are trying to make their living and all this. And they took it and ran with it. And the last time that Bob Dylan played Farm Aid was the very first one in 1985. And he hasn't been back since. So Bob Dylan's on stage and he's playing, and we're all just losing our minds because what an incredible special guest. And then I start looking, I'm like, wait a minute, I recognize some of those other guys. And behind him, playing as his band, is Mike Campbell, Steve Ferroni, and Benmont Tench, who are 3.
The Wilburys.
The Heartbreakers. It's Tom Petty's Heartbreakers. Yeah. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And so it's Bob Dylan and the Heartbreakers, basically. And like chills up and down my spine. I never thought I'd see any of those guys, play their instruments again. I mean, they play, but I never thought I would be at a show where I got to see Mike Campbell and some of those guys. So it was a crazy, awesome experience. And I had never seen Bob Dylan before. And to be frank, these days, I don't know if I would really enjoy sitting through an entire show, but now I can check him off my list
Wow.
without having to go.
If you put aside the wow factor of holy shit, it's Bob Dylan, right? So put that aside objectively. Like how is he now in 2023 as a musician? Is he still Bob Dylan? Is he still holding his own, or is he like so many of our other legends that we love that have kind of lost 17 steps?
Yeah, I think he's definitely lost some steps, but I would also argue that Bob Dylan's appeal was never his musicianship; it was his songwriting. He's never had a voice.
Definitely wasn't his voice.
Yeah,
right.
He's never vocally been somebody who everybody loved to worship. I mean, he's not unlike Neil Young. It's a very acquired taste, but with both of those specific individuals, it's really more about the experience of listening to them and what they have to say than it is, the actual performance aspect of it. So, I'll be honest. Yeah, it wasn't vocally the most impressive thing I've ever heard, but I didn't care that night.
Didn't
that
matter.
Moment. Yeah. It didn't matter. It was just really cool.
What did Bob Dylan play? Do you remember the songs he played?
He played 3 very obscure songs. So he didn't play All Along the Watchtower. He didn't play
Dylan tunes though.
Yes. Yeah. He Dylan played, tunes. Okay. I think he played a song called Ballad of a Thin Man. He played, what was it? Simply something. I don't know. There were 3 songs that I didn't recognize that are all decent songs, but nothing, no hits. He didn't say a word, didn't say anything to the crowd. He, the lights came on halfway through one of his songs, and then he played 3 songs and he walked off in true Bob Dylan fashion. Like, that's him. He's not going to be like, "Hey, Indianapolis, it's good to see you again." That's not Bob Dylan. So that was great. And then the night ended with Willie Nelson, who is 90 years old and played 17 fucking songs. Insane. Good for him. So happy. I didn't stay for the whole thing. I honestly left early because I thought he'd play 6 songs and then drop dead. But, he turns out he played 17 songs and went home. But it was a fantastic show. And I knew I have it on pretty good authority, it's the last chance I would ever get to see Neil Young or Willie Nelson, probably John Mellencamp, and now Bob Dylan. Those wow. I mean, legitimately the last time I will ever see any of those artists live. So that was the really big selling factor for me.
Well, I know what a music fan you are and an audiophile, and I'm glad you got to have that experience. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah. It was great. It beat the hell out of watching Notre Dame do good for 3.90 quarters.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad. That makes me happy. And it made me happy that you were here last week, and that was because like the last time we saw each other before that was at my dad's funeral, which is kind of a bummer, obviously. Sure. So yeah, like last week was fucking great, man. I'm glad, and then we get to podcast this week. Like, this is amazing.
This is a good
run. We're on a good run.
I'm loving it.
What? How's everything else? Things are good. Wife's good. Kids are good.
Yeah, everybody's good.
Yeah,
things are good. Things are plowing through. Summer's over, and Halloween is upon us. So,
dude, it's fall. It's officially fall.
It is. It's officially fall, and it is that time of year where one of my favorite times of year where we start ramping up all the scary movies on the way to Halloween. So I'm very excited about that. Do you have anything on your wish list for the month that you want to see? Like, I don't know about you, but like through the month of October, I try to cram in as many scary movies as possible, whether I've seen them, whether I have not, anything and everything. I try to watch a couple of them a week if I can. And I'm curious to know, I mean, I know which ones you like, I know which ones you watch, but is there anything that's on your list that's like, I'm going to make the time to watch this one this season?
Yeah. So every single year I rewatch Halloween 78 every single year without exception. I always watch it. This year I'm making it a point to go back and rewatch the last 3 Halloween films. So Halloween Ends and Halloween Kills. Or Kills and Ends, which Kills is second, right? Kills and then Ends.
Yes.
I'm going to go back and I rewatched Halloween the other night. Still thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to watch those. What else? You know what? Saw is in the theaters now, or if not, maybe tonight. I guess it's tonight officially. I'm not overly excited about that. I will probably go see it, but the Saw franchise for me has kind of lost some of its luster over the last couple years.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because I don't know if it was Spiral that did it to me, which I didn't really care for at all, or the fact that I'm not really into kind of the torture porny type, horror subgenre, which I think Saw has really kind of gotten towards. This one looks really, really good. Like just trailer wise, this one looks really good. So I will probably go see this one. I did go back and I rewatched the original Saw, which is one of my favorites. I love that film.
Oh, fantastic.
I went back and I rewatched Cabin in the Woods the other night, which I love, which I just absolutely love that film.
Okay.
And I've watched a couple of indie horror films for Scare Tissue that I'm going to review on the site. A couple which are pretty good, and I've watched a couple stinkers too. But the Exorcist trailer looks amazing.
Oh,
like that new movie looks really, really good. I don't remember exactly when it comes out, but I think it's pretty soon.
It's next Friday.
Oh, is it really? It looks really good. It looks really good.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I want to come back to The Exorcist for sure, but there are definitely a handful of movies that I want to try to watch this time around. I want to, the Elm Street movies are all on HBO right now, which is kind of cool. So you can stream all those.
Okay.
And I believe all the Friday the 13th movies are on there as well. So that's pretty interesting.
The last time I looked, I don't think Freddy versus Jason is.
I don't know that one is because actually I don't know why. I'm sure it's all the rights thing, but they were all New Line Cinema movies. I thought.
I don't think that one is though. Is it? Well, no. Let's see. Friday the 13th was all Paramount. That was all Paramount. Was Friday the 13th, and then New Line was Freddy.
Correct.
Maybe that's what it is.
I know but so Jason Goes to Hell was a New Line movie. Because they bought the rights to Friday the 13th for that last Jason movie with the anticipation that they would unite those two characters. And so I don't know if it was exclusively New Line, but I very specifically visually remember the New Line logo at the beginning of Freddy versus Jason because it's the red backlit logo instead of the blue. Mm-hmm. And here you hear the Freddy Krueger piano theme with the in the background. So like they did a really cool mesh there. So I don't know. That one might be on there. They sort everything alphabetically. So like the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are kind of out of order. I think Freddy's Revenge. I don't know. It's weird. It's like 1 and then 3 and then 4 and then 5 and then 2 and then Freddy's Dead Freddy's Dead is what the 6th one is called, right?
6 or 7,
6, and then New Nightmare, which is that one's. I think they're all in there. They're just not all side by side. I want to try to catch up on some of the more modern horror movies. I know there's some other good ones on HBO. They're like The Barbarian, I think, is one of them. And
the trailer for that movie looked amazing when it and it seems like it's a year or maybe even 2 at this point ago. And for whatever reason, I never got to see it, but god damn, it looked really, really good. That's the one where like there's like a gal gets caught like in a basement, right? She's like I think so. I think that's the one I'm thinking of where she like she's like renting an Airbnb or whatever, and like shit goes really, really south really quickly. Yeah.
So we talked about The Exorcist a little bit, and I kicked off my month of watching scary movies a little bit early. And last night at about 8:30, I'm like, I got nothing to do. My wife and kids are in bed. Let's put on The Exorcist and watch it. Why not? Mostly because this new movie's coming out. And I thought, well, I'm definitely going to go see the movie in the theaters because I haven't been to the theaters in a little while, I guess. And I certainly haven't seen a horror movie in the theaters in a very long time. I guess maybe Halloween Ends was probably the last scary movie I saw in the theater, if I'm remembering correctly.
Which is about this time last. Well, did you see Scream in the theaters?
Oh, you know what? You're right. I did. That was like February or something.
That's quite a while ago. Yeah,
That was
January,
earlier
February
this year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I rewatched The Exorcist last night, and it was a really interesting experience because to be honest with you, I don't remember the last time I watched it all the way through. It has to be at least a decade probably since I've watched it, and certainly not since I've had kids, which puts an interesting spin on watching that movie, because you know, if you put yourself in the shoes of the mother and think about what something like that, I mean, granted, this is all sort of fantastical, but you know, just picturing what you would do in a situation like that if that were your kid is pretty terrifying. But I mean, you know, I'm thinking a lot about this movie since I've watched it. And I mean, I think it's fair to say, and maybe not, was this like the first really, really big horror movie? I mean, Rosemary's Baby came out before that. So it's fair to say that maybe that one is. But I mean, before that, it was all sort of, you know, Christopher Lee's Dracula or the Wolfman or a lot of the old school black and white movies and things like that. But this is the first horror movie chronologically that I really remember being more of a cinematic experience as we know it. Is that fair?
Without doing research and off the top of my head, yes, that's fair. You know, like you can throw Jaws in there, but Jaws was not really a horror movie, and that's after that. That's what, 75. So that's a couple years later. Yeah, Rosemary's Baby. When are things like I'm trying to think. The Omen, that's in the early 80s.
Actually, I think The Omen came out in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken.
Poltergeist is like 81, 82, something like that.
I think that's 83, maybe 82.
Okay, so I just looked. The Omen is 76.
Right.
So that's still 3 years after this.
Yeah.
Because Exorcist was 73, right?
Yeah, we're celebrating the 50th year anniversary of this movie, which is
bananas.
Yeah, I mean,
there may be some films that technically came before it, but yeah, I think it is absolutely like the one that put horror on the map from a like quote unquote mainstream perspective, right? I mean, The Shining wasn't until 80. You know, it's several years after 72 for 73 for sure. And even that's not really known as a horror film. Well, I guess it is. It's more supernatural than anything, but it's definitely old. You know, Halloween didn't come out till 78. So that's 5 years after. Yeah, for sure. I think the short answer to your question is yes, I think it is.
Yeah. And it kind of shows a little bit being the first one. And, you know, my takeaway from this, you know, without trying to invite a whole lot of, criticism or anything, is that I don't really think it's as good of a movie as I remember it. In terms of story, I think in terms of performance and in terms of like the shock value of what was happening, we have the benefit of hindsight living in 2023, having seen a lot of really good horror movies and sort of how the iterations of how they've improved over the years. I can't imagine what it was like to walk into a theater in 1973 and sit through this movie where a girl is stabbing herself in the vagina with a crucifix and yelling obscenities and turning her neck all the way around to her back. I mean, like that kind of stuff in 1973 was never seen before. So I imagine at the time it was absolutely shocking. But, and I'm not taking away from it because it's not shocking by today's standards. What I'm simply saying is that there are a lot of story threads that I don't think tie together quite as well. So I don't know how much you remember about this movie, but for example, the opening of this movie starts with
Iraq, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. It's in Iraq, which is so weird because it's this archaeological dig and you just sort of assume it's like Egypt or somewhere in Africa, but it's in Iraq. And it's Max von Sydow's character, who, by the way, in this movie looks old as shit. And to think that he was in The Force Awakens,
I'm pretty sure he was 45.
I think he was around 50.
Okay.
When he filmed this movie, or close to it, because he was 90 when in his 90s when he died, and he was in The Force Awakens in 2015,
Yeah.
which is crazy. He looked as old in that movie as he did in this movie. Bonkers. But the movie starts with him, and they're doing this archaeological dig, and he uncovers this relic, right? This thing that's clear, and they have all this creepy music playing in the background, and it's like, ooh, something's going to happen. And then they basically cut to, you know, Washington D.C. or the Georgetown area, and this is where things kind of fall apart a little bit for me. I don't have a problem with the slow pacing because that's how movies were made back then, and I actually kind of like that because things marinated and you got to kind of think through them as they were happening. But the problem is that they never really connect the dots between that story and why does this character Reagan, who is the little girl, why does she get possessed? Like, it just sort of happens. It's not like she found this artifact stuck in her attic or anything like that. Like, she just sort of wakes up one day and has this demon inside of her. And that's not really great storytelling, in my opinion. Like, I think they got away with some pretty glaring oversights because it was such a shocking movie, and that was the appeal in 1973.
Yeah, so a couple things. Yes, I think you're right. I think, and if I remember correctly, the name of the demon, I think is it Pazuzu?
Yes.
I don't even know. Okay.
I don't think they ever even say that name
They
in the
may
movie.
They may not. Yeah.
And not in that movie, maybe in a future one, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. I think it does get away with a lot because of the shock factor. I think you're I was, while you were talking, I was looking. So Rosemary's Baby and Night of the Living Dead both came out in 68. This was 73. That being said, this movie is a much scarier, quote unquote, movie than those. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. But I would agree with you that The Exorcist is, and again, I'm not taking anything away from it. It's creepy. It's shot really, really well. It's actually a beautiful, like, if you can look at it objectively, it's a beautiful horror movie. It's slow as fuck though. It's really fucking boring. I know that you know this. I've for as long as I can remember, The Exorcist Part 3 is by far a superior horror film than the OG, in my opinion. It, like, The Exorcist Part 3 is a great horror movie, and like a lot of people overlook it because they're like, oh, it's the third film, blah 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 blah. No, it's a better horror film than the original, in my opinion.
You know what? Call this a hot take, but I don't disagree with you. I think it might be an overall better movie, and it's oh man, it's really hard to admit that because I mean, there was a stigma around horror sequels in the 80s, and you know, I don't remember how or why we ever watched this. I know we watched it together multiple times when we were in college, but I don't know how we ever had the bravery to sit through a sequel, especially after the second one, because
the second one's so terrible. Oh my God,
I didn't see the second one. I watched the trailer for it last night, and I didn't realize James Earl Jones is in that movie. That's hilarious. But the trailer looks abysmal, but I'm wondering if I need to try to put myself through this. But, you know, that aside, I think that I did want to talk about The Exorcist 3 because I do think it's interesting that I think I would much rather rewatch that movie than the original. The first one's slow. The first one has some editing problems, I think, in the beginning because there's just a lot of shit that doesn't need to be there. And it's already a 2+ hour movie. And, you know, one of the things that I really wanted to comment on that I thought was interesting, and maybe this is kind of stupidly obvious to everybody else, but watching this movie through last night, I realized this movie it's not Reagan's movie. This is not a story about her. It has nothing to do with her. It is Father Damien Karras's movie. It's all about him. He's the central character. She's the one that gets possessed, but he is the one, I can't say that he has a character arc, but he is the one that has the most development out of all the characters in that movie, because, you know, the movie starts with him and he's kind of losing his faith as a priest. He's not sure what he wants to do. He kind of wants to get out of the priesthood. And then, you know, this murder happens. And, you know, the possession piece of it happens, and he comes in and he sees this, and it's almost like his faith was restored by seeing what happened to this poor little girl. And then, of course, the climax at the end, which ironically isn't him saving. Well, it's kind of him saving the day, but it's him doing that by being very selfless and assuming the possession of this demon. Like he says, come into me, take me, leave her alone. And the demon does that. And then he throws himself out the window to kill himself, which we will learn by the third movie didn't work. But
so good.
But I mean,
like, so good.
But the movie is really about him, which is funny because I feel like his character is very understated in that movie. He's not like the star of the movie. You kind of think it's the mom, and then you think maybe it's Reagan, but it's not. It's really about him. And I thought that was really cool.
And he's not even like the lead priest. Like there's a whole nother priest that like is the like the quote unquote, like he ultimately does the exorcism, but like there's another priest that they kind of like call in from the bullpen. Right?
Well, that's Max von Sydow.
Max von Sydow, right? Exactly.
Yeah. And then he dies while he's trying to perform this exorcism.
Yeah.
And then, Father Karras, he can't even finish it. He doesn't finish it. He goes in there. He sees his friend who he's been friends with for like 10 minutes. He sees him dead and he loses his shit and he starts physically assaulting this little
beating
girl.
The shit out of Regan.
Yeah. And he's like, get out of her, blah, blah, blah. And then, the finale of the movie, but it's not about Ellen Burstyn's character. It's not about Linda Blair's character. It's about Jason Miller's character. It's about Damien Karras. And I found that really interesting having rewatched this.
I'm glad you came to that revelation because I value your opinion as a movie watcher. I value your opinion as a horror movie watcher. And it kind of validates my opinion again, that again, not that the original one is not a good movie, because it is, but the third one is a far superior film in my opinion. And I know that we're not here to talk about 3, but again, it's just kind of a slow movie. The second one, the first one is a really slow movie. And don't get me wrong, there's some super iconic, the score, there's a couple iconic shots, to see Regan coming down backwards, doing the spider crawl and the crucifix and the pea soup vomit and all sorts of stuff. I would imagine that probably hits you very different as the father of girls than it does me as the father of boys.
I'm used to it. I see Olive do that spider walk all the time.
Right. But yeah, it's a really, really slow movie. And I'll tell you what it does. And I don't know if it does it on purpose, but it makes the audience do a lot of work to get through it. You know what I mean? Like it really makes them invest and really try to follow along. And maybe because it was so successful at grossing people out and being so spooky, maybe that's why it was so successful. I'm not sure, but like looking at it again, 50 years later, as with a objective eye, it asks a lot of the audience.
And I think you make a lot of good points there. And I really don't have a problem with how slow it is. I have a problem with the fact that it feels slow because they just put a bunch of crap in it that didn't seem to matter. It didn't pay off.
Didn't pay off. Yeah.
It's not, in my opinion, good storytelling because it didn't really serve the story ultimately. And you mentioned the score. I think that's funny because the one thing that I noticed that really stood out to me this time, aside from some of the other things that I mentioned, is that there is no score to this movie. There's most of this movie has no music playing in the background. The popular theme called Tubular Bells is only played maybe twice throughout the movie. Once, about 10 or 15 minutes in, and then I think another time, maybe 2 or 3 times, but it's not overdone like it's like Michael Myers' Halloween theme is done in some of the sequel movies. But I thought it was one of the things that I think actually really worked for it is there was no score throughout most of the movie because I think it felt more immersive. Like I felt like I was in that bedroom with Regan and the priests when she was gyrating around and bouncing up and down on the bed, and it was really cold in the room. Like the music would have just sort of made it feel like more like a movie, whereas that made it feel more like I was part of the experience. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't know that that was intentional, but it's not like a consistent score like you would see like a John Williams movie or something where there's always a theme playing in the background.
It's funny. So I mentioned the score. I think you're right. You're right. It's not there. It's just that super iconic one piece of music that is so iconic that when you think about that movie, you think about that. And it's really not even the whole piece, right? It's only about 6 or 7 bars worth of music, but it's so iconic that it's difficult to kind of separate that music from that movie, at least in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you said that you saw the second movie. I have never seen the second movie. Can you summarize what that movie is about? Like, and I'm not that's not a joke. Like, I don't know anything about that second movie. I remember seeing the VHS tape in the video store and thinking, oh, I should really rent that. And I never got around to it, but it's notoriously bad. But I don't know, what is the plot? What is that movie about?
I've only seen it maybe 1.5 times. Linda Blair returns.
Yep.
In fact, I'm pretty sure it's the only 2 movies she's ever been in for I think.
Oh, she's been in other movies, but those were the biggest.
Yeah.
And there was another, I'm trying to remember who it was. There was another actor that I think returned for that movie, right? Wasn't her mom. It was, who was it?
Richard Burton, Linda Blair, Max von Sydow is back in it. It must be in flashbacks. James Earl Jones. Yeah. So here's what I can tell you without like going to Wikipedia and getting a plot summary. Regan is older now. She's like, I don't know, 17 or 18. So what? She's a couple years older than she was in, what was she in the OG? 12, 13, something like that ish.
That, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's a lot of like hospital doctor scenes where they're doing tests on her and like sleep studies and like that, just boring shit. Like,
does she get possessed again? Is that why they're doing these tests?
I don't even remember. That's how bad it was.
Now you're gonna make me watch this movie because you can't tell me what it's about.
I can't. I can't. But what I can tell you is it was so bad that I didn't get through it twice. How about that? Like, I watched it once and I was like, holy shit, that's terrible. I can't. And maybe who knows? You know what? And if I'm wrong, I will come on this podcast the next episode and eat crow and be like, holy shit, I was wrong. But it was so fucking bad that I just, I
guarantee you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Nobody has said that that's a good movie. Nobody in the history of movie watching has ever had a good thing to say about that movie.
Yeah. And so it was funny because I remember very vividly walking through the video store aisles and looking and seeing Exorcist 3. And so Jason Miller, who is Damien Karras, went to college with my father at the University of Scranton,
which is crazy. So cool and crazy.
Right. And so I don't think they were the same age, but again, they both went to the same college. And I had seen Exorcist 2 and I was like, oh my God, like I can't fathom that this third one is any good. And I was blown away by that movie. So that one, Damien Karras returns, right? Or the character Jason Miller returns in that movie. And who else is in that movie? George C. Scott is like the main. Yeah.
What's interesting that I didn't know until I started reading it last night is George C. Scott actually plays Detective Kinnaman, I think is his name.
Who's in the first movie.
In the first movie.
Yeah.
But he's a character from the first movie that I think has no purpose whatsoever. I don't feel like he serves anything to that movie other than in this awkward scene with Ellen Burstyn where he asks for her autograph, but he's investigating a crime, but he ultimately has nothing to do with where that movie goes.
He doesn't. So if I remember, and again, I haven't watched that movie beginning to end in a while, but if I remember correctly, isn't there a character in that movie that is like in the in the room with Regan, and he gets thrown out of that same window that Damian Karras goes out of, and
Yes.
they pin the murder on Regan, right? Or
yes. So
and then isn't and Kinderman is the one that shows up to investigate that crime. Am I remembering that right?
Yes, that is exactly correct. So Ellen Burstyn's character, her name was Chris McNeil, and Chris McNeil was a famous Hollywood actress. And I got the impression that they were renting this house in this area while she was filming a movie. And she had some kind of Hollywood boyfriend who she was dating or she was seeing or whatever. And then that sort of iconic scene towards the beginning of the movie where Reagan comes downstairs in the piano party and says, she looks at this guy that's her boyfriend, and says, "You're going to die tonight." And then she pees all over the carpet.
Yeah.
And it turned out that would be true. Only I guess it wasn't that night. It was the next day or whenever it was. But anyways, it was that guy who was mostly not memorable to the rest of the story. He wasn't a famous actor or anything like that, but he was watching over Reagan while Ellen Burstyn was out filming her movie, and the nanny or babysitter, I don't remember what her name was, but she had to go, she had to leave, she had to do something. So she had this guy watch Reagan. And when she came back, like, the guy was dead, but he had been thrown out the window, had gone down the stairs, his head had been completely turned all the way around. So so that was the impetus for this detective coming in the scene, because he comes and he investigates, and he kind of looks up the stairway from where the guy died and sees Reagan's window, and then walks up and starts talking to her and starts putting together the pieces. But I don't really think that ever manifests into anything interesting. Like, he doesn't outright accuse Reagan of doing anything, and then it just sort of goes nowhere. He shows up at the very, very end after, Damian Karras throws himself out the window and all that. But, like, for what? Like, he just kind of walks in the room at the end. Like, it really serves no purpose. But they continue. There's this other character in the first movie. His name was Father Dyer. And he's this kind of good-looking older guy who was a priest as well. He was a good friend of Damian Karras in that movie. And Father Dyer and Kinnaman become friends in that movie, especially at the very end. They kind of become a little close. And Father Dyer is in Exorcist 3 as well. And Kinnaman is in Exorcist 3. The thing that is confusing to me as a movie watcher is neither of these actors have reprised their role for this. It's George C. Scott and it's somebody else. So I think it's because this Kinnaman character plays such a trivial part in this first movie that it was confusing to me to connect those dots. Like, he might as well have been some rando cop that was investigating all this. Like, the fact that he had a connection with Damian Karras and all this stuff, it didn't really resonate. Like, they didn't do a good enough job of connecting those dots from my memory. I don't know, but it doesn't make Exorcist 3 a worse movie, but it could have been a better movie if they would have done a better job of connecting the dots between George C. Scott's character, who was in the first movie. Like, I, for 20 years, didn't realize those were the same people.
Yeah. And Father Dyer in the third movie is the priest that plays the Max von Sydow character. Now, well, what's Max von Sydow's? What's his name in the OG movie?
Father Marin.
Okay, so like Father Marin dies in the original one, and then Karras like finishes, right?
Yeah.
And Father Dyer dies in part 3, right? And then actually it's George C. Scott's character, which is Kinderman, that like finishes the exorcism in part 3. Spoiler alert. It's like a 50-year-old, 40-year-old movie. But you're right. I don't know. And maybe it's because George C. Scott is a much better actor than the guy that played Kinderman in the first one. And,
for sure,
and vice versa. But I would implore people, if they have not seen Exorcist 3, and you don't really need to know the Exorcist backstory to enjoy that movie, in my opinion. It's just a great horror movie.
Yeah. It's a different kind of horror movie in comparison to the original. You can't really compare the two. The one thing,
No, yeah.
another thing that I would comment on that I think was really interesting about the first Exorcist movie is that it had no jump scares. It wasn't a jump scare movie, in my
No.
opinion. It was, I mean, again, lack of score. The only time, I mean, things got scary when you go in the bedroom with Reagan this scene happens and she's, you know, obviously possessed, but like there's always sort of a precursor, like there's a, you know, it'll show the mom in the hallway and she'll hear a scream for the room, so you know something's getting ready to happen, so you can sort of prepare yourself. There are no jump scares in this movie. That's not this kind of movie. Exorcist 3 definitely has some jump scares, but it also
It has. Yeah.
It doesn't rely solely on those, though. There are some
No.
really good creepy scenes, like that confessional scene.
It's so good.
Oh my God, that is so disturbing. I saw that again last night as just a quick clip, and holy crap, was that, ugh, that gave me the chills.
So yeah, you're right. There's a couple, if I remember correctly, there's like, especially specifically scenes around like Pazuzu, right? Like there's a couple times when you can actually, they'll flash and you can actually see the demon, and it's done very
it's discreet. I think
it's discreet. Yeah, it's like it's just a couple frames here and a couple frames there. It's done really, really well. Whereas in the third movie, and I can't even really talk to the second movie because I don't remember it all that well, other than to say it fucking sucked. It was boring. But the third one, it has, in my opinion, possibly the greatest jump scare in the history of horror, which is the one where in the hospital with the hedge clippers, right? But there's at least one more in there that is a jump scare in audio only, right? Where like they cut to something and they get the big, you know, like the big, you know, the big, you know, that kind of thing. But there's at least a couple in there. Yeah. But again, because of all of these reasons, that's why I'm really pumped to see this next one. Yeah. Because the trailer looks awesome. And who did they bring back from the OG? It was
Ellen Burstyn is back.
Ellen Burstyn, yeah.
Yeah, which is crazy.
She's like shit in like 50 years, right?
Yeah, she's like 90 years old. I don't know. Well, no, I think she's done a lot of stuff, but I don't think it's been like, you know, A-list kind of movies. But like she's like 90 years old, and she comes back to this movie. I don't really know to do what specifically. Maybe
is she playing the same character?
Yes, she is. She is playing Reagan's mom. Who, you know, which I can only imagine. I don't know what kind of story they're going to build around this, but I think it's really interesting that they're bringing her back. And, you know, the other interesting thing is that Linda Blair was on set to do some sort of, I don't know what you call it, mentoring or consultation to these children, because there's 2 kids in this movie versus 1 who are going to end up, you know, battling this whole possession angle. And Linda Blair was on set to, you know, kind of walk them through that and teach them how to do it, and, you know, give them some advice and be a mentor again. But, you know, this is planned to be a trilogy. This is, you know, David Gordon.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that. I had no idea.
David Gordon Green wants to do 3 movies. And if they don't get Linda Blair back, I feel like it would be the biggest mistake.
Yeah. Okay.
But here's the thing, though. In the second trailer that they released for this movie, they're implying that Linda Blair's character is dead, because if you watch it really closely, there's this scene where Ellen Burstyn walks in the room with one of the kids who's been possessed, and she's like, "Are you looking for Reagan? She's in here with us." You know, and it's like, what does that mean? Like, does that mean she disappeared, or does that mean she's dead, or who knows what it means? But I mean, we've been, you know, swerved in trailers before, so it wouldn't be the first time. You know, the Avengers would artificially put characters in scenes that didn't belong there. So
yeah,
granted, this isn't Avengers, but I don't know. Like, I can't imagine them making 3 movies without having Linda Blair in this somehow.
You kind of have to, right? I mean, you kind of have to. And here's the thing: whether you love Blumhouse or not, I'm a huge fan of Jason Blum, because that dude goes hard into the horror genre. I don't always love everything that he's done.
He's trying to keep the shit alive.
He's trying really, really hard.
Yeah.
And he's got a vision, and he's willing to spend money, and he's willing to go after it, and he's willing to take chances. And that means that sometimes we're going to love it and sometimes we may not. But like, I'm a huge fan of what Jason Blum and Blumhouse are doing. I mean, that's where it's at from a horror perspective right now, right? I mean, there's nothing else out there.
No, I mean, yeah, I would agree. That is sort of where you go to breathe new air into a franchise. And I'm really hopeful that Nightmare on Elm Street makes its way there at some point, someday. I don't know. The Halloween did. Maybe they'll get the rights to make an Elm Street movie. We can talk about that. But there's one other thing I wanted to touch on is that, and this is, I just came up with this today, and I doubt it's true, but, you know, this movie hovers around two girls, you know, being possessed. What if this Pazuzu, because she, you know, the trailer's like Ellen Burstyn's like, I know you, or, you know, I've seen you before, or whatever. What if one girl's being possessed by this Pazuzu character and the other one's being possessed by Reagan? How cool would that be?
That'd be great.
Like, what if somehow she died and that did happen? Like, she is the one that's doing. Yeah, I don't know. They could go a lot of different ways with this, but I definitely think that it's going to be good, and I'm excited. And that comes out, next week, next Friday. What were you going to say about Elm Street? I feel like I diverted you.
No, you didn't. Other than I would love to see Blumhouse get their hands on Elm Street. I was so let down, like I think most people were, with the last version of Freddy. The Jackie Earl Haley.
Jackie Earl Haley.
Yeah. I was just really let down by that version of Freddy. You know, when you're talking about, and I think we've done this even on the podcast, right? When you're talking about kind of the Mount Rushmore of horror, right? Like you got Freddy, Jason, and Michael, and then that kind of fourth spot is it's up for consideration, but that's the big three, right? And we haven't had a big three. I mean, other than we've had Michael in relatively recent times. We even had Freddy or Jason in a long time. Like the last time we got Jason was Michael Bay, and that was what? It was in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Early 2000s?
Yeah. I think the problem with Jason is that he's a tough one to write a movie around, because as a character, he's not really that interesting.
Yeah, he's terrible. Yeah.
I mean, he's good, but he's just not that interesting. There's nothing intriguing about the character. Although I guess you could say the same about Michael Myers, but they have written a better universe around him. Like he's got
that's the Jamie Lee Curtis
universe.
It's not really the Michael universe.
Right. Okay. I guess that's fair.
At least the last three films.
Yeah, there's a Superman to the Lex Luthor. There's some balance there, right? There's not a primary character for Jason that I feel like
Jason doesn't have an antagonist, does he? No, he really doesn't.
Not a consistent one, no.
And even Freddy doesn't either, but Freddy has his own personality.
Yeah, true. Freddy is it's a much more compelling story. You know, somebody who kills you in your dreams, which is something you can't get away from, is still to this day, I think, one of the most fascinating things you could do. And with today's technology and movie making, I can only imagine that the dream sequences would be amazing if they could finally do that. I don't know who you'd fan cast for that role. You know, who would be Freddy Krueger these days? That would be I don't know. I would want it to be a younger actor. I know Kevin Bacon actually kind of put his hat out there, no pun intended, to get selected for that, but he's way too old for this part at this point, I think. I mean, he's got to be close to Robert Englund's age, but I don't know. I think if they could find somebody younger and maybe try to develop a whole new story around it, it would be fascinating. It could be really good.
Yeah. I think I just looked. Let's see. Robert Englund was born in 47. I think Kevin Bacon was born in like 58. So they're he's 10 or 11 years old. But even still,
I don't want to start a potential franchise with, you know, somebody that old. I don't think it would last.
Yeah, back to Exorcist. I would love to see Regan be the demon. That'd be amazing. It'd be amazing.
I just hope she shows up. I think it would be good fan service for her to be a part of it. Even if she gets killed, I don't know. Even if it's a cameo, I don't really care. Like, she was not the most important character from the first movie, but I think she's one of the biggest stars. I definitely think she's one of the people that have come out of this. Like, everybody knows who Linda Blair is. Ellen Burstyn, I think a lot of people know her as well. I don't think anybody knows Jason Miller. Of course, Jason Miller passed away many years ago, unfortunately. Jason Miller is the father of Jason Patric, the actor from The Lost Boys and Sleepers. And his mom, Jason Patric's mom, that Jason Miller married, was Jackie Gleason's daughter, which is just crazy. It's
crazy. Yeah.
It's a neat sort of 6 Degrees kind of situation, but I don't think I ever saw Jason Miller in anything else. But man, I think he did such a good job of encapsulating this character in the 2 movies that he played him.
He did, for sure. All right. Hey, we've rambled long enough about The Exorcist Part 3, Exorcist Part 2. Don't see Part 2. It's terrible.
Don't see Part 2, but go see the new one. And please go to the theater, buy popcorn, live the experience. Movie theaters are not doing too well right now. The writer's strike looks like it's on its way.
I think it's over, right? I thought it was over.
I think we're getting there. I think it's going to be there pretty soon. But hey, man, we can't live in a world without movie theaters. So please go support your movie theaters, buy tickets, buy popcorn, buy overpriced drinks, slushies, whatever it takes. Just do it.
Yeah.
Enjoy the experience, because once it goes away, we can never get that back.
So real quick, and then we'll wrap up and we'll get out of here. Have you thought at all? So we're recording on September 28th right now. Have you thought at all about where we're going podcast wise in the next couple episodes? Do we have any topics? Do you have any ideas of where we're going?
I mean, it would be a shame for us not to cover something Halloween themed, right? Like, maybe not necessarily the Halloween movies, but some scary movies, maybe a deep dive. We haven't done one of those in like a year at this point. It's been a long time. It's kind of in fact, the last one we might have been Halloween Ends. I'm not sure I remember, but it's definitely time. You know what? We really need to do a deep dive on an Elm Street movie. I think we're long overdue for that. Clearly, we can't knock them all out because there are 7 of them, and then a Jason versus Freddy, or maybe we could even do a deep dive on that. I don't know. But Elm Street is my favorite, and I think if it's not your favorite, it's a very close second. So
it's right up there.
Yeah. Maybe we pick our favorite one and just do that one and talk about that. I think that would be fun.
Okay, I'm totally open for that. All right. Well, let's see. So let's see that we're in September right now. Maybe we're gonna 1 or 2 episodes in October.
Let's try for 2.
Halloween. Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good bogey to shoot for sure. So, All right. That being said, that's Mr. Pip. I'm Chewie. This has been the 411 for 406. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one, folks. Late.
Adios.